Hello, class. Today I'm going to be talking about the documentary of Crime After Crime about Deborah Piegler and Oliver Wilson. Deborah met Oliver as a teenager. Her mom introduced her to him, and she had met him at a market. He found her very charming and caring, and she never had a thing to worry about. Whether it was money or someone just caring for her. She did have a daughter at the time, and he loved her unconditionally. One day, he took her out and said they were going someplace, and he was telling her he ran into trouble with money and needed her help. So she thought that he was taking her to apply for a job, but instead he dropped her off at a location to be a prostitute. She didn't want to do it, of course, and when they got back home, he beat her up continuously. She begged him to stop hitting her and that she would do anything that he asked of her. Deborah also had a child with Oliver, and later on, he became very abusive verbally, and she kept telling him to stay away from her, and he wouldn't. He never left her alone. The only way to protect herself and her kids was to kill him. It did get to that point where she felt that was the only option that she had. Around this time, there was no one to help Deborah and her family as far as women's shelters or any centers. This documentary doesn't only show an excellent job of untangling Deborah's case from start to finish. It also explores some of the conditions that Deborah faced in prison. This picture is a picture of some people, including her sister and her daughter, that were standing outside the courtroom after Deborah's case was reopened. This picture from left to right is the filmmaker of Crime After Crime, Deborah's and Oliver's daughter, and the lawyer Joshua Sanford. This image is Deborah's lawyers, Nadia Acosta and Joshua Sanford, on the top holding a picture of her while she was in prison, and on the bottom, them talking to her about the case. This is Deborah with her sisters, her two sisters. Deborah Piegler's case, a little bit about that. She was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life in prison for the murder of Oliver Wilson in 1983. Later on in the film, we did find out that he molested her daughter, not only molested Deborah. Why was nothing done? Like why didn't Deborah speak out about the abuse to the police? One thing a relative said in the film was that the police did not do anything about it because they were African American females. Like their mentality was very different back then. The police had a mentality of, oh, it's bound to happen. That's what happens in their culture. All this is normal. Deborah's mom in the film talked about her personal experience and how she was abused, and now seeing her daughter going through the same thing. Oliver's sister was abused as well, and she says that even though that was her brother that she had killed, she understands why Deborah had to do it. She says that she was exactly in her shoes, and no one can know how victims of abuse feel until they're in their shoes. Two land use lawyers chose to take Deborah's case voluntarily, and they fought as hard as they could to get her free. It took them a little over 5 years to get her out, and by that time, Deborah was already diagnosed with lung cancer in prison. I think a lot of lawyers wouldn't have put up with Deborah's case just because of the depth of it. They may have given up after countless of times they were rejected by the court system to reopen the case and for new evidence to enter. Throughout the documentary, I was curious as to why these two lawyers who were doing this voluntarily just wouldn't stop. They had many chances that they could have taken to get out, but they put in their all to make sure that she was going to be free. They shared their personal experience with domestic violence, and all of it made sense. It hit close to home for them. They weren't going to stop until she was out because that was almost their mother as well. It was very personal to them. Would two other lawyers who didn't have a first hand experience with domestic violence be that willing to go above and beyond like these two did? The lawyers played a big part in the case, of course. Their efforts and dedication is what got Deborah out after so many years. There was a lot of hidden evidence, such as him molesting her daughter. This, this evidence had not been presented when Deborah's case first entered the justice system. For some reason, it was held back and they didn't want it to be known. By 2002, California became the only state to allow new evidence of abuse, to reopen old cases and reduce sentences. Statistics show over 80% of women in prison are survivors of rape and or abuse. After this film, it showed me how messed up and biased our justice system is. There is no open-mindedness or consideration for victims, especially of abuse. Although this was many years ago, really how much has the justice system changed since then? In an article in correctionalassociation.org, talks about how 82% of women in prison suffered serious physical or sexual abuse as children, and three-quarters have histories of severe physical abuse by a partner. The system responds to women solely as perpetrators, not victims and survivors, sending them to prison for long periods of time with no chance for parole. The large number of survivors in prison shows a failure of both the justice system and social service system. Some of these women are in prison for defending themselves against an abuser. Others are in there because they engaged in criminal activities to survive, or because they took action against their abuser out of fear or threat of harm. Domestic violence should, of course, be taken into account and addressed at all stages of the criminal justice process. Because of this, many of the survivors end up serving time for simply defending themselves. On a personal level, a personal view, after I watched this film, it did catch my attention because it was about domestic violence. Um, my cousin's ex-boyfriend shot and killed her in 2011 in San Antonio, Texas. She took all the right steps to get out. He wouldn't stop, even after they ended the relationship. Just as Deborah ended the relationship with Oliver, my cousin was continuously stalked and threatened, and just being followed around. A few days before he took her life, she called the police to her apartment and showed them the evidence so she could at least file a report, or they could gather enough to go arrest him. She was crying her eyes out and begging for their help. The officer said, "You need to calm down and relax, ma'am. Nothing ever happens. We see this all the time. He's not going to come kill you. He's not going to come hurt you." After hearing that, she gave up with the justice system and felt only she could save herself. She did not go to the extreme of trying to take his life. If he had it in his mind that he was going to take her life, it was going to happen. That was her mentality after she met with the police officers. It was a waiting game after that. Watching this documentary, it really gave me chills and made me kind of understand a little bit more with the justice system and how they work. It also opened my eyes and made me realize so many women are going through this. My cousin would have been in the same shoes as Deborah if she would have killed her ex boyfriend. Overall, this documentary was amazing. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching it. Not only was Deborah's story extremely interesting, but it allowed me to learn more about the justice system and their flaws, as well as gain respect for lawyers who put their heart, sweat, and tears into doing their job and giving those that are incarcerated comfort when they have no other way to seek it.